Oh, I'm so glad to see how many people are here and to see familiar voices. Faces and names. It's now time for us to begin, and I've just been noticing that I somehow I ended up more terrified this year with this year's process work than ever before, which is probably a sign of coming out of dissociation. I'm sure it's positive. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some slides about what I'm offering tonight so that you'll have kind of a context, a little bit of context for what I've been thinking about this year. And and then what we'll do is we'll do a lottery, and whoever would like to be in the lottery is welcome, as long as you have something that you can feel that you'd like to work on. If you're likely to get your name drawn and then say, I have no idea what I'm going to work on, I won't be able to work with you effectively this evening. It's something that one can do, certainly, and but not tonight. If you're only willing to put your name into the lottery, if you're willing to be recorded, we have 1,700 people signed up for this webinar tonight. So it's really important that you feel comfortable with being held in this way, in this very large and lovely circle. Jaya, were you going to say something right there?
Yeah, I wanted to let folks know about the recording to make sure that you're willing to be recorded. If you volunteer for the lottery, we'll open that up soon, but not quite yet. I'm not quite ready to track it yet. And it will be posted on YouTube. So we really want to make sure that you're completely okay doing this work. And if you find yourself wanting to be able to do this kind of work and have a more private space, Sarah offers private sessions, but we also do classes. So just letting folks know that there are choices about this, and we'd love to have you. And doing being willing to do a demo really supports everyone's, not only their learning but also their healing and their self-awareness. And yeah.
We travel along. I travel along with the person who's working, and so does everyone. And it's not just me who does the work, but there's a whole list of people on the website who do the work, including Jaya, and other folks who are here on the call with us this day. Um,
Before you begin, is there anything particular about, besides knowing that they want to work on something, does it have to be a particular like topic or just
no,
anything? Okay,
it
wonderful.
could be anything, because what we're working with tonight is the idea of the crucible moment. And so I'll take us into the slides now. Yes, anything you'd like to work on is welcome. Just know what it is. And if you have body sensations when you think of it, that makes it even easier to work with. It means it's even closer to the surface. But you get to come with whatever you have. All right, now we'll begin to look at our slides so that we can get a sense of the context of what we're talking about here. And we called our webinar this year Radical Being With: How to Touch Alarmed Aloneness Through Crucible Moments. So before we go into the lottery, we're going to talk about alarmed aloneness, and we're going to talk about crucible moments. Oh, and somebody has their hand up, but actually we're not taking raised hands tonight. Put whatever questions you have in the chat, and Jaya and I will look at them and read them and answer the ones that we can.
And if you're having any kind of technical trouble or you need anything, you can send me a private message. You can also send me messages to ask questions anonymously. We'll get to some, but we won't be able to get to all of them.
Thank you, Jaya. So every year I offer a process work demonstration to share something new from the world of resonance and relational neuroscience. Relational neuroscience is this extremely fabulous field of study which has come about since neuroscientists discovered that they could get people to think about each other and look at their brains while they were in fMRI machines. So this whole idea of like how do we affect each other is the subject of the study of relational neuroscience. And it creates really interesting knowledge for those of us who do session work of any kind, including empathy buddies or resonance buddies, all the way up to folks who are psychotherapists or, excuse me, Jungian therapists, whatever kind of work you do one-on-one in sessions with people, this material tonight applies to. So this year, we're working with crucible moments. What is a crucible moment, for goodness sake? It's a moment during a session when a client gets to have accompaniment where they have never before been accompanied. And this happens because the practitioner is sort of stepping into the current of everything implicit, of everything non-conscious that is arising and is available to the practitioner to be held, and the practitioner is simultaneously paying attention to the client and paying attention to the headwinds or the currents, such as social contracts, the practitioner's past trauma and alarmed aloneness, the client's broken parent field, the practitioner's intrusive default mode network, the practitioner's desire to fix things, the practitioner's desire for things not to be true, and the practitioner's desire for the client not to have pain. So we're kind of deeply in relationship with our own humanness as practitioners or as space holders when the person for whom the space is being held is reaching for something that's been hard to put their arms around. Let's see. A crucible moment can't happen unless the client and the practitioner are linked. If the practitioner is not linked with the client, the practitioner won't be able to accompany the client, and the practitioner won't even know that there are headwinds, even if the practitioner is acting them out. So, what would the practitioner be acting out? What are you talking about? If the practitioner is taking on the client's broken parent, if the practitioner is confronted with their own past trauma and their own past alarmed aloneness, if the practitioner is confronted by their own intrusive default mode network, if the practitioner is not linked with the client, then they won't even know that there are things that they're acting out. This can happen when a practitioner has contempt for a client, for example, or when a practitioner believes that they are better and no more than a client, for example. Those are the kind of headwinds that we're up against when we begin to do session work. And crucible moments can't happen unless the client and the practitioner are not only linked, but also differentiated. If the practitioner is not differentiated from the client, the practitioner will be sucked into the client's experience rather than being able to accompany the client, and the practitioner will be lost in the headwinds. In many modalities of process work, including some approaches to therapy and to nonviolent communication and to coaching, not all, but some, practitioners are told that their safety and professionalism depend on their ability not to feel with the client. In these modalities, it's okay to talk about feelings. The practitioner would say, "What are you feeling?" Or the practitioner may say, "Is there anger there?" But the practitioner does not have explicit encouragement and experience feeling with the client, and often believe that indeed If they have tears, for example, when the client is sharing that they're not being professional, this is an idea that is losing its power as relational neuroscience, and a deeper and deeper understanding of the importance, the healing importance of relationship begins to become more commonplace. But certainly this is the past from which all session work arises, was an idea that it wasn't professional to feel with the client. Sometimes teachers will say, somebody has to stay on the bank to keep everybody from drowning. Sometimes teachers say, put yourself on the back burner so that you are not available to be swept away by your client's experience. Sometimes teachers say, if you feel anything with your client, you will be carried away by sympathy and you won't be able to be a neutral party. This helps practitioners to avoid the human phenomenon known as contagion, where we naturally vibrate with the emotions that someone close to us is feeling. But contagion implies choicelessness, as if we are being pulled into the water of emotions without our consent. There is an implicit fear of contagion within this way of teaching about session work. There is a lack of faith in the practitioner and in the practitioner's learning and growth of neurons that are able to be with, both to be with emotion and to be at the edge of their own capacity to feel emotion. We need to have both to be able to have crucible moments. And of course, the fear of contagion might be very real if we don't know how to swim, if we don't have the right hemisphere neurons that we need to be able to swim in emotions. This is a wonderful series of pictures of the growth of adult neurons. So as we work with emotions, as we're held in our own emotions as practitioners, this is what happens to our right hemisphere. And the slides will also be in the classroom for you. Or they won't be in the classroom? No.
No, so the slides will be emailed out along with the recording.
There we go.
For folks, and I've just put them also in the chat. I'll put them in one more time just in case some folks have just joined. But
Great.
with the recording, you'll get access to the slides.
Oh, great. Thank you very much, Jai.
Anytime you join a class, we always give access to the slides in the classroom.
Yeah. So our attention belongs to us. We can have choice about where and how we bestow it. Contagion, remember, implies choicelessness. But this way of working, a way of working where we're aware of our edges and we're working to stay with our clients, this way of working requires us to be able to choose where to put our emotion so that we can both stay attentive to our client and track ourselves, both be linked and differentiated.
And Sarah, can you give a more of a definition of what linked means in slide 5? And you just mentioned it again.
Yeah. So linked means that we're making our client the focus of our attention, and we're allowing, when we do this, we're allowing our brain to move into synchrony with the client's brain. This is the linkage. We're allowing ourselves to move into a relational space where we're affected by the client, not as contagion, but because we have a warm curiosity about our client's experience, and we're wondering, what is it like for our client? That's the linkage. And then the differentiation is that we're able to pull our attention away from our client and track ourselves as a distinct and differentiated being who does still have a relational connection with the client and can return to it. So this is the linkage and the differentiation that happens in session work. I hope that was helpful. You can let Jaya know, or you can put in the chat if that was helpful. Yeah. And G writes, can we think of linkage as a sharing of a feeling experience without being overcome or lost? The sharing is the linkage, the without being overcome or lost is the differentiation. So in that sentence, G, you have both of them, both linkage and differentiation. So when we have choice about our attention, we only have to go swimming when we want to, for example, in session work. What if the water of emotions is not dangerous? Because rather than learning to stand on shore and throw life rings, the practitioner has actually learned how to swim. What if someone else has spent time swimming with the practitioner? When this happens, the practitioner becomes familiar with the ocean of emotions and knows how to swim there. What if the practitioner says, oh, I know this ocean? We can never know it completely, but we can know what it's like to be in it. Then the client learns that the ocean of their emotions is not so dangerous. Sometimes our support people teach us how to climb out of our emotions rather than how to swim in them and find their beauty. And this, if someone is teaching us this way, it is because no one has ever swum with them. As the practitioner stays with the client relationally and trust is built, the client begins to calm and to reach for something they've never touched before. Staying with the client relationally means staying in the relational part of the brain. And this wonderful illustration I found today, it says the brain's relational real estate, and it has the heart yarn tied to the right hemisphere in the picture of the brain. You could say it was the right hemisphere if we were looking from behind. And that's what's important, is the right hemisphere. This capacity, so the capacity to stay with the client relationally, this capacity is determined both by the way the practitioner directs their attention and also by the way in which the practitioner uses language. When we are relational, at least a part of our attention is on our own bodies, and at least a part of our attention is on the other person and how they are doing. There's our linkage and differentiation. When we are relational in our language use, we aren't trying to get anything done except to stay with the client relationally. If the practitioner can stay with the client relationally, the crucible moment begins to form. Crucible moments are the times when both the client and the practitioner have the opportunity to feel something that has never been touched in company before. The potential for crucible moments exists in every session. as long as resonance is the main thing that is happening, and I have a picture of tuning forks here, because that's such a good representation, a metaphor for the way our bodies, if we bring our attention to them and to the other, that our bodies will vibrate with another body. This constant potential for crucible moments in every session exists because resonance is always at the edge of what has never been explicitly known before. And brains, when accompanied, are most interested in healing. Sometimes what is touched is given words. Sometimes it becomes a picture or a sensation or a shared facial expression or gesture. Right now, I'm particularly enjoying the facial expression of the man in the blue striped shirt with the glasses on the right of the screen. There's something about his facial expression that is touching the level of terror that I'm feeling coming toward this webinar. So facial expressions can do so much that's interesting.
And Sarah, there's a request to go back to the previous slide and just pause there. And there was a, is this the one that someone wanted? And someone says, what does this mean? This constant potential exists because resonance is always at the edge of what has never been explicitly known before.
So I don't know how many people are familiar with Marshall Rosenberg, who developed nonviolent communication, but he would ask this question, which I always thought was so interesting. He would ask the question when he was doing session work, what is alive in you? It turns out that from the standpoint of neuroscience, what is alive in us is whatever is waiting for resonance. What is alive in us is given juice by its connection to the amygdala, which is a central brain organ, which is very much responsible for fear, but also has organ areas that are devoted to the other emotions as well as fear. And the amygdala is where what's alive in us vibrates. So as soon as we're doing session work with someone who knows what they want to do, which is why I had made that request of you, that you would know what you wanted to work on, we're already starting to step toward what has never been explicitly known before. Because if it were explicitly known, it would not be vibrating. If it's explicitly known, it's been transferred and now is being held by the hippocampus, which is the organ the brain organ in the middle of the brain. There's one on each side. And the hippocampus timestamps memory and contextualizes memory. My friend Olga Nguyen says that this kind of work turns traumatic memory into life experience. And what has been turned into life experience is no longer humming to be held with resonance. I wonder if the person who asked the question could let us know if that was helpful.
There's a question about the definition of resonance. Well, I'll look for that person's answer.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, that one. What is the definition of resonance? The definition of resonance, I'll pull it out of my stuff so that I have a standard definition. I'll pull it out and give you a sense of it. Here's a little bit about empathy, attunement, and resonance. And you can feel empathy for people without ever talking to them. Scientists do all kinds of measuring of empathetic responses, having people watch films of other people. But then there's no relationship. The person's watching a film. You don't have a relationship with the person you're watching a film with. You can have empathy for anybody. But resonance requires relationship. So my standard definition of it is feeling into something that someone else is experiencing with them, being moved by a sense of their emotions and energy, and asking, verbally or non-verbally, whether what we're perceiving has any relationship with what they are feeling. And this process bringing both people into more connection and understanding with one another. Yes, and there are dictionary definitions of resonance, and my definition of resonance is different than the dictionary definitions of resonance. Daniel Siegel, yes, it's in the chat. The description is in the chat already, if you just scroll up. Should there be slides, says Catherine? Not right now. Right now, I was stopping and talking with you. And there was one other question about the amygdala. Is the amygdala literally vibrating, or is that a metaphor? That's such a good question. The amygdala is constantly working and has constant electromagnetic and electro physiological charges running through it. So I suppose it could be said to be constantly vibrating. Yeah. Okay. Oh, did I send it to you personally, Jen?
Yeah, I just posted it. And
Okay.
I received a private message. I wonder, a private question. I wonder if you're comfortable to answer a question, or would you like me to save it for later?
Go ahead and let's do it, and then we'll move on back into the slides.
So someone asks, they say, there's a saying that a therapist can only meet the client as deeply as they have met themselves. Is it possible with, for example, very early trauma that therapists who don't have experience, the same experience with something like that themselves, can't and won't meet patients who have? I have parts who have almost never been touched before, but instead therapists have been triggered and attacked me, even when they were trauma specialists. And something in me feels wrong because we so much need someone who can hold space for those intense pre-verbal emotions.
Yeah, no kidding. I think in a way that's what this webinar is about. It's about it's about moving to how the heck do we move into those intense places? So I'd say hang on to that question and ask whatever's left of it at the end
And
of the presentation.
there's a second part of the question, and you can
Okay.
let me know if you want me to ask that again at the end.
Okay.
Which is they say, am I wrong? Am I doing it wrong? What do I need to do so that a therapist can meet that part of me? And I feel like that is really relevant for all of us who
No
seek.
kidding. No kidding. And Ali also has this experience. I'm just going to close my eyes for a moment and see if there's any kind of answer that feels like it would be good to make right in this moment. Just, I guess what I want to say is that as I sink into this, I just have tears, because it's a very true lived experience, that people, all kinds of people, myself included, have the capacity to attack rather than to resonate when things get to be too much for them. I think this is why, first of all, nobody's doing anything wrong. No one's doing anything wrong. You're trying as hard as you can to find good therapists, good support people who know what who know what their own edges are. And this goes to that other question, the question about whether people who haven't felt things themselves can actually resonate with someone who has felt something. My sense of this is that if we are practitioners who are committed to this way of working, then as we're working over time, both we and our clients are creating transformation in the brain and changing swaths of brain experience from implicit experience, unheld, unaccompanied experience, into known experience. So my sense is that what we're working with tonight is the very remedy for these experiences of having parts and pieces and memories and experiences and emotions that have never really been known or held before. And that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not like someone else can be with us in this way and everything changes. But someone else can be with us in this way and a few more neurons get to be claimed for hippocampal life experience rather than being left to traumatic memory. So my sense is that it's a gradual co-deepening understanding of the places where humans have been left entirely alone. And everyone has been left entirely alone at some point. And so as we work, even if we have not had the identical experience to our beloved client, we're moved by our care for them and we're moved by what they've lived through and our present and time travel past responsiveness to them. Don't know how clear that was, but my fingers are crossed. So we'll leave those questions for now, Jaya, and then those people can ask whatever's left of them at the end. Great. Okay. There are many new messages. We'll stop here with the chat processing, and we'll go back to the slides. So this constant potential for crucible moments exists because resonance is always at the edge of what has never been explicitly known before. And brains, when accompanied, are very interested in healing. Sometimes what is touched is given words. Sometimes it becomes a picture or a sensation or a shared facial expression or gesture. But the crucible moment, like a period of gestation, is always a shared moment of silence. The crucible moment opens a new part of the ocean, one that has not been touched before by either the practitioner or the client. During this time, the practitioner is working against the current and just staying with and sheltering the client as the client decides where to go. If it isn't hard for the practitioner, it isn't a crucible moment. The practitioner brings everything they have learned to be able to stay with the client without moving into their instrumental brain. I tried to find a picture of someone climbing out of a river, and the closest I came was the zebra coming out of the river. So this is a metaphor for a practitioner that's like, let me out of here. I'm going to shift into my left hemisphere. I'm going to become instrumental. Here are the things that happen when the practitioner moves into their instrumental brain. This is not a complete list, but it may give you a sense or a feeling of it. It doesn't have attacking on it, but it does have gaslighting on it. Could have attacking on it. Advising, storytelling, diminishing, denying, gaslighting, taking the other person's side, taking the client's side, comparing, blaming, changing the subject, reframing, suggesting, instructing, directing, coaching, offering solutions, offering opinions, offering hope. Interesting. Offering hope means we're getting out of the river. So this was what we called tonight's presentation, Radical Being with How to Touch Alarmed Aloneness Through Crucible Moments. We're now having a sense of what a crucible moment is. Now we're asking the question, what is alarmed aloneness? The nervous system has 3 states: social engagement, activation, and immobilization. This is from Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory, commonly known as fight, flight, freeze. This phrase actually only names 2 of the 3 nervous system states, leaving out social engagement. So fight, flight is the same thing. It's activation. It's one of the stages. Activation is commonly known as fight or flight. But this implies that we're activated only when we're angry, fight, or frightened, flight. But this is not true. We are also activated when we have been left alone or have a sense of abandonment. Children go into alarm when they are lost. This alarm may include fear, but it isn't only fight, flight. It is sympathetic activation. Here it says fight or flight response. Again, something from the general media, which implies that we only are activated with fear or with anger. But even when we're having alarmed aloneness, we have these same bodily responses. The muscles become more tense, trembling can occur, the output of digestive enzymes decreases in the stomach, the heart beats faster and harder, the blood vessels constrict, there's chills and sweating, so the flow of saliva decreases, the eyes, in the eyes, the pupils dilate. In the lungs, quick, deep breathing occurs. In the bowel, food movement slows down. In the blood vessels, the blood pressure increases as major vessels dilate. Partners call it abandonment, and scientists call it separation distress. Grown-ups can also experience alarmed aloneness with death, separation, divorce, migration, children growing up, loss of employment, coworkers or managers leaving, friends moving, being ghosted. Alarmed aloneness is a state that we rarely name. We aren't supposed to be alarmed about being alone. This is a common quote. Be tough and stay resilient. Keep going no matter what. Not knowing that alarmed aloneness exists means that the circuit of emotions of a circuit of emotions and words is never completed. And people can stay in an unaccompanied state of alarmed aloneness for decades. So now I call the nervous system states fight, flight, alarmed aloneness, and freeze. I'm still leaving out social engagement because it's long. So do you need acknowledgement of alarmed aloneness? For clients, the experience of alarmed aloneness is often where the water of emotions is hardest to endure. And it is very often the place where the practitioner wants to climb out of the river. I just, and it is so hard because alarmed aloneness can easily become an echo chamber of itself. You know, I have clients that I've worked with for 10, 15 years, and I often have the experience of, oh, today we got to touch a little bit of alarmed aloneness that we have not touched before. And it's my capacity, my incapacity, and my growth incapacity that takes us farther into that unknown territory, that previously unknown territory. And my clients' growing capacity from having a steady accompaniment. So we're talking about, when we're talking about growing neurons, we're talking about the way the brain changes gradually over a decade or more. It's quite beautiful work. intensely beautiful work. And there are moments of insight that provide huge changes. But the growing of those neurons of self-compassion and self-warmth and self-resonance that allow us to touch the enormity of our experiences, though that growth is slow growth, and it happens for both people. Then I wanted to say about the alarmed aloneness on this slide. Alarmed aloneness can easily become an echo chamber of itself. It's like we experience the alarmed aloneness, and then no one else knows that we're having alarmed aloneness. So we have alarmed aloneness there, and no one understands that no one knows about the alarmed aloneness. So we have alarmed aloneness there. So this is what I mean by an echo chamber of itself, that it's something that will just keep replicating as we go. So getting accompaniment for it is, of course, extremely important, and happens slowly, but I believe really happens through this phenomenon of the crucible. And so now we'll do our lottery, and while Jaya's doing the lottery, I'll take a look at what the questions that are in the chat, Jaya.
And so just so folks know, some folks may have joined, actually several people have joined since we spoke about it. If you'd like to be on the lottery, please send me a private message. You need to be comfortable being recorded. It will be recorded and publicly available on YouTube. Secondly, you need to be able to know what you'd like some support with. Those are the two things. It doesn't have to be any particular topic, just something you know that you would like some support with and you'd like to work with Sarah on. And I probably won't reply to your letting me know you'd like to be in the lottery, but I will put you in.
Thank you very much, Jaya. Melissa writes, what does this mean during this time the practitioner is working against the current and is just staying with and sheltering the client as the client decides where to go? This means that the practitioner is aware of the current of, for example, social contracts, which say that we don't even know that alarmed aloneness exists, let alone it being okay to name it. The practitioner is aware of their own intrusive default mode network, that they've started thinking about a trauma that resonates with what the client is going through, rather than keeping their attention on the client. The practitioner is aware of this and is bringing their attention back to the client. The practitioner has broken parent field emotions perhaps arising within them, where they want to dismiss the client or gaslight the client or attack the client. They feel those things coming, they notice them, they know how to put them aside and continue to stay connected to the client. This is the current that the practitioner is working against. It's current that belongs to both the practitioner and to the client and to the society at large, that this particular pair of people is working within. And sheltering the client means that the practitioner is not disclosing to the client all the things that they're struggling with. They're just bringing themselves back again and again to an attention to the client and an attention to their own body. And they're also listening for what's emerging for the client. Where is the client taking us? I hope that was helpful. You can let me know, Melissa. Where does fawn fit in? Fawn is an accommodation of social engagement in order to keep the focus on whoever the perpetrator is, or whoever the person is that has more power and is perceived as dangerous. Keeping their attention, it's an attentional use of social engagement in a semi-fight or flight stage. If you start to be interested in this and you're like, what the heck is she talking about? This is so interesting. Come take classes with us. We're touching everything. Marcia says, how is all this impacted when we're called to accompany a loved one who is in pain? Marcia, I think it becomes even more complicated because we're when we're with a loved one, then we exist as a whole person in a different way than we exist as a whole person as the practitioner. So my sense is that you're doing even more work if you're called to accompany a loved one who is in pain. Abby, thank you for letting me know that this is resonating. Leora says, was there something about emotions and words not being completed? This is this is the work of Matthew Lieberman at UCLA that shows that when the emotions and the sensations arising in the body get given a word that matches them, then the material is that then the amygdala begins to calm. So that's Leora, that's yes, it's for alarmed aloneness and for every other emotion as well. But it's alarmed aloneness. Yeah. Rhiannon writes, is alarmed aloneness more when someone is in deep dorsal parasympathetic state dissociation or more in the sympathetic state? It's sympathetic state, and then the deep dorsal parasympathetic or dissociation, we don't know what it is until resonance begins. It might be alarmed aloneness, but it might be rage, it might be terror, it might be frozen life energy that wants to emerge. We don't know until we begin to do resonance what the parasympathetic dissociative state is. And Mary writes, and we find so many ways to keep ourselves from experiencing alarmed aloneness because of the terror that can accompany it. Yes. And Cara and Timothy, hello, my darlings. How do you feel it's the same or different from freeze? Alarmed aloneness feels like sympathetic and dorsal. It depends on your expression of alarmed aloneness, how much you can feel the sympathetic activation. If you think of a baby crying for their mother, they're not in freeze. They're in a sympathetic activation. If you think of those states when adults have lost someone and they go out in public and they see their loved one everywhere. They see the fleeting back disappearing behind a corner. It's just a constant sense of looking. You can kind of feel the sympathetic activation. And then there can be qualities of dorsal as well that are kind of linked. There can be freeze states and immobilization states that are linked and feel very connected. Garlic, oh my darling, I'm so glad to see you. How does one accompany a client who is sharing stories about trauma and avoid secondary PTSD? Mm. We need supervision. We who are practitioners, we who are space holders, we need somewhere that we can go, because when a client's experience touches us so deeply that we carry it away as an intrusive memory, it means there's something that needs to be held or mourned or grieved there. And my experience is that the more that I do this work and think about this work, the deeper that experience of being moved and changed by the clients becomes. And the more that we all always continue to need supervision. We continue to need someone to hold us in our holding. And Mona says the echo chamber can also happen if we talk ourselves into radical self-sufficiency, not needing other people, etc., which perpetuates the cycle. R.S. Wallace says, what is alarmed aloneness? I get where it comes in the process of fight flight, but how does it occur for a person? It occurs for a person when someone important goes missing. Is that what you mean? You can let me know. Rachel Garst wrote, who do we send the request to, Jaya? So you got it. Okay, Rachel. Okay. We won't talk about fawning tonight because it's an accommodation rather than a clear nervous system state. Is there a definition of alarmed aloneness that you can post in the chat? I don't know if we have it exactly defined.
Yeah, if you would like to define it right now, I can type it up.
Alarmed aloneness is the state of being separated from someone who is very important to us. And that someone can be a parent, as in the parent's distracted, has mental illness, has depression, is unable to be with the child emotionally, even though the parent is there physically. Same thing with partners, same thing with children. Um, but it can also be, people often have alarmed aloneness about divinity or creation or God, a sense that there can be a very profound sense that in the moment of conception, something was lost. Something very dear to us was lost. So we can have alarmed aloneness for whatever word we want to use for the thing that's greater than ourselves, as well as having alarmed aloneness for people. It's the experience of separation and the activation of pain in the experience of separation. Did you type that? Marion writes, how does alarmed aloneness correlate to the act of shunning or isolating someone? Does the rejection equate with alarmed aloneness, or is alarmed aloneness much deeper? We can definitely step into intense pain and existential loneliness from being shunned or isolated. It is the hardest thing for humans. Being ghosted is so hard for humans. The experience of someone just disappearing without saying where they're going is absolutely mind-blowingly hard. And Phoenix says, Sarah, how has it felt to experience this with someone? He said, it's like nothing either party has touched. Could you describe it? I think I'll invite you to see if you feel it in the session work that we'll do tonight, Phoenix, and then you can ask again at the end.
And Sarah, may I read a couple private ones? Or would you like
Yes,
to go to
yes,
the demo?
maybe two, and then we'll go to the lottery.
Sure. How does alarmed aloneness equate with grief and loss? What does one natural process of grief, or sorry, when does one natural process of grief turn to alarmed aloneness? How are these two intertwined or not?
These two are absolutely intertwined. So all of the flavors of grief and sorrow and shame, even some humiliation, embarrassment, all of these flavors of sadness and shame are part of the panic grief circuit, which is in the human brain and the mammalian brain, where energy and information travel in the limbic system and the lower cortex when we are separated from someone important. I guess home could be, I mean, sometimes there are things that are some things that are like someone for us. It's really something we decide ourselves. Nobody else can say, you don't feel alone. Although my mother believed that she could tell me that I was not sad. So, so we are told that we don't feel things, but we get to decide for ourselves what we feel. So yes, that was a partial answer that begins to say, yes, they're all linked and they'll have different qualities depending on how the person is using the word and how their body responds to each word. And then there was a second one that I said I would take, Jaya, from the private questions.
I'll just read you this one. I just answered it in the chat, but
Okay.
someone was wondering where the term alarmed aloneness came. And what I said, and you can let me know if that's correct, is that it's a term that Sarah coined in response to the work of researcher work and research of Jaak Panksepp and her own work. Is there something you'd add to where alarmed aloneness comes from?
Yes, it's an effort. It's a phrase that I coined in the effort to take the word abandoned and remove the implication that someone has abandoned us because there can be alarmed aloneness when someone dies without, without a sense of that there was anything volitional in the death, for example. And so it's a way that it strips it of implication of fault for me. And that's why it's an important term for me. And yes, let's go ahead and do the lottery.
We'll work with Mary Blair to begin with.
Okay, thank you.
Mm.
Wonderful. Oh, hello to Mary Blair.
Hello. I do have COVID, so hopefully that won't interfere.
Well, hopefully
Fairly mildly.
what we will help your immune system, I hope.
I hope so, yeah.
So tell me, what would you love us to work with today?
Well, it's something that's been coming up for the last few weeks in different ways, but I have had this lifelong fear of being unwanted. And I think and know that at least my parents were ambivalent about my birth, I can verify that, or they verified that. But I developed a strategy of being needed when I was very young,
Oh,
and I've carried it through my whole life. So now I'm a new grandmother and helping out with the baby, and she's 8 months old. But as they've transitioned to a nanny share and don't need so much, and my son is getting we need to talk about these things, but he's getting triggered by stuff that I do or don't do. And so it's the threat has just been elevated. That as they no longer need, like, will I be wanted? And a second part of this is my daughter-in-law has basically cut off from her mother since the baby was like 6 weeks old because of whatever's been triggered for her. And so that kind of makes it feel more threatening, like, oh, they did it with one grandmother, they can do it with another. In my head, I think I have a good relationship with my son. It's just she's been a very challenging baby, lots of GI issues and reflux and things to be scared about, and they've both been overwhelmed.
yeah,
And of course, now we all have COVID, so that's a new variation.
right.
But something happened recently, and I thought, I actually called my brother, one of my brothers, and talked about it, which seemed really helpful, but I can feel it. It's still there, even though I thought, oh, I think maybe this has shifted and I'm no longer so afraid. So that I can have different kinds of relationships that are not just based on being needed. Does that make sense?
Yes. As you're speaking, I just noticed that there's like a sense of tears in my eyes, but very far back. Like if there were a metaphor for how far back they would be back behind my ears. And it's very hard to breathe. And I'm wondering if it's something like that for you.
Yeah, I feel it often in my throat,
Mm.
because I think it's connected with a sense of shame
Oh,
to not being wanted. And so trying to avoid that. Um,
yeah.
and I think I just recently realized I was married for about 11 years, and I went into overdrive with meeting all the needs. So it just occurred to me that, like, I really didn't focus on my career as much as I would have liked to. And I kind of blamed that on him not supporting me. And he was a physician and I had to be on call for the kids 24/7. But then I realized, no, I was so busy putting my energy into being needed. I didn't have anything left.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I worked part-time, but I never did as much as I wanted to do. So I have sadness about that too. But
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm
You
kind of
said,
owning it more.
yeah. You said that you spoke to your brother about something that happened recently. Do you want to say what it was, or is that a
Well,
private thing?
Macy, I don't know if it's too long of a story.
Can you just go to the worst moment? Just 3 sentences. What was the worst moment?
Um, well, I usually take care of Zoe Friday afternoon, and I had an eye appointment opening come up, and I asked if I could switch with the nanny, do the morning, and she could do the afternoon or whatever. And he asked her, and she said, "Oh, she can come. She'll just stay." And I said, "No, don't do that. Like right away, don't do that, because I know it's $100. They were going to spend for her to stay for 4 hours." And he just ignored that, and because he had asked her, I guess he had made a commitment, and I felt almost terror.
Oh,
That just triggered that. Oh, what if there comes a time when you know where I really am not needed in a lot of ways, and then it is just based on desire. Will that be there? Will that um will there be enough desire? Especially with this triggering stuff that's going on. My son is a scientist, and he thinks if you do this many calories and this little sleep, that she'll sleep 12 hours at night. So he keeps trying to adjust things so she'll sleep for 12 hours, and it's hard for me, like when I'm there and he'll say, like, well, just wake her up at such and such, and I'm like, it feels so misattuned, I can't do it. And so we're having this conflict
yeah.
about that too.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing, it was kind of recent awareness, like, oh, I'm gonna have to just not do Friday afternoon. I can do the morning, but I can't wake her up after an hour of a nap in the afternoon. I can't
Yeah.
do it. So
Yeah. So, would you like us to time travel to this moment when your son said, "I'll just have her stay all day"? Would it be okay with you if you and I step through
yeah,
time and space just to this moment? And we'll put your son in a golden floating bubble, and we'll put the phone. I imagine you're on the phone in a golden floating bubble, and
texting really, yeah.
texting, yeah, yeah, or the computer, however, whatever you're texting on, we're just gonna put it away. We'll just sit with you, and we'll say, "Mary, do you need acknowledgement of of the how easily your mattering can be eroded?" And as I say that, my heart is pounding, and again, it's hard to breathe. How are you doing?
That was one of my thoughts, but kind of like, well, it's only going to be $5,000 a year to replace me for that period of time. Eventually, she'll start sleeping in, and they won't need me to be there on the weekends to allow them to sleep in. Yeah, it just feels like it would be easy.
Yeah. Now I stop breathing entirely. How do you do? Yeah.
Huh?
How do
Yeah.
you do? I said, yeah. Are you also stopping breathing entirely?
Well, I did for a moment there. It is
Ah,
one of the things I do.
yeah. Well, yeah. So as we're sitting with Mary, oh, I wonder if we would say to her, like it's an impossible dream guess, I guess. Would you love your extensions of care for your grandchild to be met with enthusiasm? And would you love to feel wanted?
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Is there You had mentioned shame before, so I just want to say it aloud in case it's here. So we would say to this Mary who is on the phone, do you need any acknowledgement of shame?
Yeah, that very early experience, of not feeling wanted.
Yeah.
Not feeling welcomed.
Mhm.
I mean, no, they were overwhelmed Catholic family. There's no one to blame, just it's just how it was.
Yeah. But that then draws me to bring the Mary who was on the phone and go back in time to the baby. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So then it's three of us, two Marys and a Sarah, stepping through time and space to the baby who was perhaps also not breathing. Where do we find her?
I think in her crib by herself.
Uh, so the three of us come in. Yeah. How is it for you to see her?
I just want her to know she's not alone.
Is it okay with her if you pick her up?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's almost like your body might be guessing. Oh, do you need somebody to come to you? Do you need somebody to want you? Do you need somebody to be with you? Do, do you worry that there's something you could be doing differently that would make it all more possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
How does this baby respond to your reach for her?
Reaches back.
Oh,
And I think she feels safe when she's with me.
she does feel safe when she's with you. I have this image of the baby putting her head your against your upper chest, feeling you there. I wonder if you have a tremendous tenderness for her. I wonder if your capacity for love in this life has never been fully received. I wonder if no one has ever known how deeply you love.
And that feels true.
It brings tears to my eyes. How does this baby like being loved so much?
They say she's like drinking it in.
I wonder if she's been very thirsty for a very long time. And I notice that now I'm breathing.
Yeah, me too.
Mm. Is the baby breathing?
Uh-huh.
And we have a second Mary with us, the Mary who was on the phone, or rather texting with her son. How's she doing?
Oh, calmer, calmer.
Or
Yeah.
would she like to be embraced as well?
Oh, for sure.
Ah, yeah.
Just having moved here recently, I haven't. No, it's not true. I was going to say I don't have friends that are like I could, you know, go to and say I need a hug,
Huh,
and that's probably not true. There probably are some people. So,
but
um,
the sweetness of hugs, huh?
yeah,
Yeah.
but I miss my closest friends who know me so well, and whose hugs are different because of that. There's something
Yeah, yeah.
different experience.
That their arms have delight in them for you.
Yeah, I could say that's true. Yeah, yeah.
Is there something that wants to be acknowledged that would be something like, I mean, there's two things that are coming up for me. One is that when we started to connect with the Mary who had been texting, that I had an image of, sometimes I have an image with these moments of shock of the ground being pulled, the carpet being pulled out from under. But in this case, I had a sudden image of receiving a blow and tumbling off a cliff. And I wonder if the terror in those moments is that big.
It was pretty big.
Yeah, yeah. I wonder if we could. Is that a good metaphor? The being pushed off a cliff in that moment, or is it a different kind of falling?
I mean, I can't think of another one. So
So if it works, then maybe we could go into the air with her and catch her. Or fall with her if she needs us to fall with her so that she's not falling alone.
Yeah, maybe falling with, and you know, I could land on a trampoline or something.
Yes, yes, we'll fall with you and land on a trampoline. Or one of those big blue cushions that they use outside of buildings that people jump into when they're so
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that works. Yeah. I don't really want to bounce back up
No.
so much and fall again.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah,
Uh, how does she do with us with her? We've got the baby too. The baby's safe.
no, that feels good. I mean, that was a lot of healing came from my talk with my brother. He was very much with me.
Oh,
Like, how did I not know he was so good at listening and empathizing before? Because he does listen to me quite a bit, but very present.
mm,
You know, he did get defensive and say, oh, but, you know, I didn't really go into the early childhood part of it. The origin, I just
yeah,
spoke from where I was, because then he might have defended them or something, you know.
yeah.
But I also know that from talking to one of my other brothers who has cancer now, that he has this image of us growing up in all in our own little worlds, like little satellites, you know, very separate.
Oh,
You know, alcoholic family, typical kind of, you
yeah.
know, we didn't talk to each other about what was happening.
No.
Yeah. So and of course John experienced that too, you know.
How is the baby now?
Well, she seems more alive,
Hmm.
you know, like bright eyes, more
Hmm.
alert and
Hmm.
more there, kind of more there, you know.
Does she want to come home with you instead of staying in the room with the crib or in the catch of the big blue pillow that we jumped into?
Yeah.
And so if you take both Mary from the texting and Mary from being a baby and bring them back through time and space to present time, just let them be here with you. How are you? How are they?
I feel a lot of compassion and love for them
Mm, mm,
and for me,
mm,
all of us.
mm.
Um, I don't feel the terror or anxiety so much, you know.
Good.
I was just thinking of the definition. I don't know who said this, but anxiety is overestimating the threat and underestimating your resources to deal with it. And so it just came to mind like,
Yeah.
okay, I have resources to deal with this. If
Yeah.
the worst that I imagine could happen happens, you know,
Right.
there's some sort of rift or something, you know.
I'm also in this moment really appreciating what you said about how you could go in the mornings, but you couldn't wake the baby up from the nap.
Yeah, I actually, right after I came to that conclusion, this is so ironic because I came to that conclusion the previous Friday. On Sunday morning, he said, we've decided to let her sleep longer in the afternoon. And I just
Oh,
breathed a huge sigh of relief. And I went, okay, I don't have to really talk about this. And then, ironically, this
yes.
appointment came up so that this whole thing happened differently, you know, but
Right,
it still happened. It
right.
was like,
You still
oh,
have to,
the irony of it, right?
yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't have to say, hey, you know, I do really almost want to have that conversation because he gets so triggered when I don't follow his directions precisely. You know?
Yeah.
So about how much to feed her and what at what time and whatever.
Right.
Because I'm just that's not how I do it, you know. It's I kind of parented in a much more intuitive way, kind of attuned way, I hope. Anyway, I have to not be so serious about it, you know.
Mm,
He is a scientist after all. He's trying to control the input, get the output, get the results he wants, and he'll just keep adjusting things until he gets there, and which will be never. But anyway, until he realizes he can't get there. But anyway, yeah. So maybe I feel strong enough to have that conversation about how I was going to have to say I can't do the afternoon,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do the morning, but there's another family involved, so it may not work for them.
But I'm just really appreciating, I'll say a couple needs that are met for me. Is this a good place for us to stop for today?
Yeah, sure. Thank
And
you.
then we'll come out to the circle and see if anyone would like to write needs met and gifts received in the chat. Is that okay with you? If people say what gifts
Oh,
received?
yes,
From,
yes.
yeah, and I'll read some of them aloud once they start coming. But
Okay, thank
I'd
you.
like to say some needs that are met for me. Um, First of all, inspiration with, you know, the sort of this commitment to finding your way. What can you do? How can you stay involved and stay in integrity and be with the baby? There's something about that consideration touches me really deeply. And then also the fall off the cliff and getting to fall with you. That met needs for me of accompaniment and courage and
Mm.
truth telling. Yeah, yeah. That was a moment where I offered hope.
As we're flying through the air.
And then we got to back off of it and do the full fall. And I was very, very happy that because that's a moment where I was, wanting something different for you, but we got to do what you wanted. And that felt very good to me. Yeah. And now we'll come out and see what kinds of needs were met and gifts were received from our folks in our circle. Penny writes, a poem touched by your kind eyes, your tears and silences, holding me so beautifully. I hold baby me in my arms as I feel you truly seeing me, appreciating my capacity to love. I love little me even more. How wanted we now are. Penny. Amy writes, insight into my own mother's experience as a child and how that relates to her need to be needed. Thank you, Mary.
Say that one again.
It's insight into my own mother's experience as a child and how that relates to her need to be needed.
Oh yeah, we have that too.
Yeah,
Ancestral
yeah.
in common.
Zach writes authenticity, connection, tenderness. Muna writes touched by Mary's open heart. Steve writes this met my needs for courage. Magdalena writes I feel seen. Cara and Timothy, deep tenderness in the gentle welcoming back of the baby Mary and Mary of a few days ago, both back to the safety of being with you now. Abby writes connection. Alice writes tenderness and vulnerability. Vivian writes love and care. Annie writes tenderness and accompaniment. Cassidy writes acknowledgement for how easily the sense of mattering is eroded. Can I read you one or two more?
Yeah, and is there a way for me to copy this?
Yeah, you can save the chat.
Oh
Mary,
yeah. How do I do that?
the three dots at the
Oh,
next.
more?
Yeah, and you can save it and it will be on your computer. Or you
And
can
how do I do
email.
it? How do I do it? It says record.
No, just send me a private message with your email and I'll send it to you later.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Jaden writes, needs met of tenderness, falling with the baby in terms of accompaniment, catching, and using our bigness to hold young ones through falls, the delight of a trampoline. Needs met for finding breath after not breathing, once naming big truths. Needs for our capacity for love being received in their fullness. And Nushin writes, needs met for realizing how deeply I love. And there are many more that are very, very beautiful.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you. Is there anything that you'd like to say before we transition, Mary?
No, I just so appreciate it. I will, take time to digest and, hopefully integrate all this experience and the learnings and that, things will shift.
It's a start, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, now, is it okay if people ask questions about the process, Mary? Is that all right with you? Okay. Okay. Such beautiful needs met and gifts received. I think, and I'd like to check with Mary, and we're not going to take raised hands, just right in the chat if you can. I'd like to check with you, Mary. The moment that felt most like a crucible moment to me was the moment of naming how deeply you love. Was it something like that for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah. That having that recognized.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was such a wonderful surprise for me because I was looking to accompany you in the alarmed aloneness, and your love for the baby was so great. And there was often when there's alarmed aloneness, then there's much less ability to hold the baby self. And so I was like trying to be with the, so part of the current that I was working with was a practitioner, was a preconception about where we would be working.
Oh yeah.
And so then there was this wonderful surprise that this was what we were, that this was where this particular exploration was taking us.
Well, I mean, that's interesting too, because I know when I've been grieving losses of relationships, I've always, I mean, often have felt that wasn't recognized
Yeah.
or really seen, that depth of love.
Oh,
That somehow not seen. I mean, I thought of it as it's not enough somehow, you know.
Yeah.
So the idea of it's not being perceived is different than it's not enough.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. Or not being received. Yeah.
Yeah. So then I'll come to the questions that people have, yeah. So Cara writes, Sarah, what do you recommend for how folks can digest and absorb after receiving this radical accompaniment? Oh, Cara and Timothy, it seems like we are thirsty, thirsty plants, and our leaves have wilted from not having this kind of accompaniment. And there's something that happens, I think, for the nervous system that's like bringing water in through our roots. And you can see people's faces change. Their faces will often soften and a little more color will come to their cheeks. And this is a part of of the digestion and absorption. I I myself like hot baths and Epsom salts and saunas. I like hot experiences to help me to digest and absorb. But once we start to have it more regularly, then all of a sudden it's like we miss it if we don't get it. Like, where's that accompaniment? So we become used to it very quickly once we discover where to find it.
Yeah.
You can let me know, Cara, if that was at all helpful. And Gunjit writes, Sarah, I am so touched by this work. I am curious, how did you create the link? What is your inner process like? Is it just something that comes with practice? With the resonance work, there's time travels and unconscious contracts that are kind of process forms that sometimes hold some of the ways that things develop. And the time travel work that we did has been shown by neuroscientist Ruth Lanius to have a beautiful effect on the default mode network. That the default mode network, the automatic voice of the brain, when we've lived through trauma, it will keep cycling back through the trauma again and again, trying to resolve it. And it can be actual memories, or it can be felt sense memories. And with alarmed aloneness, it's often felt sense from very early. And when we do the time travel work, it changes the default mode network doesn't have to cycle through the areas of the brain that hold trauma anymore. We get to use our life energy for something else besides having to relive and relive and relive a felt sense memory or a tangible memory. So, Gunjit, I am to some extent guided by what I've learned from the from relational neuroscience that helps me to understand what are the really effective processes. But the edges, the places that are edges are places where, I mean, we heard the one where I was offering hope for catching Mary and stopping her fall. And then I realized, oh, I'm offering hope. And so then I was able to say, oh, should we fall with her? And we got to fall with her. And that was so important. And I felt so relieved that I had noticed that I was, that because we leave our clients in those moments, and learning how not to leave our clients, it has many, many, many levels. And it's not wrong when we're climbing out of the bank, like climbing out onto the bank, like the zebra. We get to have compassion for ourselves, and then we get to see if we can go back in the river as we learn this. Gunjit, you can let me know if that was helpful at all. G has a question for you, Mary. Are you open to a question?
Oh, yes. I am going to go get some Kleenex now.
Okay.
Sorry. I ran out of Kleenex. There we go.
This question says, Mary, when you touched the moment of acknowledging your capacity for loving, not having been fully received, did you also feel a little met by the baby Mary's willingness and need to receive your capacity for loving?
Yeah, no, I saw that earlier and I appreciate that question. It did kind of resonate as I read it, and that'll be one that I'll stay with as I move forward here. But yeah.
And Christy writes,
Helpful.
oh, good. And Christy, we've been sending you emails from the help desk and we haven't been getting your response. We need to know what you want in your inscription. Christy writes, I am so curious about how you moved back and forth between naming your own sensations, tears in the back of the head, not breathing, and checking with Mary. Can you talk more about differentiating between your own sensations and being attuned to Mary and naming these as part of the resonance process? And I'm very curious how it was for Mary to hear you naming these sensations. Mary, would you like to answer that question before I answer the first part?
Well, it gave me the sense that you were with me and attuned, and even if it wasn't 100%, that really didn't matter. What mattered was the desire to to be with me in that way. So
Oh, thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So my experience with body sensations is that they are key, that they are so different from the regular register of speech. And they really let our clients know that our right hemisphere is active. And it doesn't, as Mary mentioned, it usually doesn't matter if the sensations aren't the same at all. It's that someone is feeling with us. This has so much meaning to have someone feel with us. And so so I'm very clear that these are my sensations, but I'm also very clear that they're arising because my attention is on Mary. And that if my attention were on someone else, different sensations would be arising. So it's kind of this beautiful, emblematic use of body sensations to be able to really be with somebody. So Christy, you can let us know if that was at all helpful. And then Valerie writes, how does the one who does the ghosting understand the pattern and manage the pain of that behavior, especially as a survivor of alarmed aloneness?
Oh.
Valerie, I don't quite understand your question. You could put in the chat, perhaps, when you say the one who does the ghosting, is that the person who has disappeared? Because the person who has disappeared doesn't understand the pattern and doesn't understand the pain. They don't have pain. They are managing their pain by leaving. They're getting rid of their pain by leaving the relationship. So let me know if that was what you were asking. And it sounds like Bo Karen Lee, you can let me know whether I answered your question as well. And Jaden echoes a question from earlier. Can one attend to one's own alarmed aloneness by oneself and with one's own exploration? And any recommendation on how to approach that? And the answer is one the reason that I wrote the first book, Your Resonant Self, was because I became very aware that we can have contracts that tell us that people are not safe. We can have lived experience of people not being safe. And in our lived experience of people not being safe, it can be impossible to have somebody else help us attend to our alarmed aloneness. So we may need something like a book. And I tried to make the book really warm and inviting so that it would feel like being held by a book instead of being held by a person, so that it might be safe for some people to be able to begin the journey. As we work with our unconscious contracts, which we haven't talked about tonight, they're the agreements that we make with ourselves to try to survive being left too alone. As we work with our unconscious contracts, we can begin to release the ones that say that we can't trust anyone. And then we can start to integrate and feel within us the people that have that love us, even though they are not who our parents were, or that they're different than our family. And Mary, may I reference something that you said as you were speaking at the end? It was about your friends and remembering their hugs and how they love you and what their arms feel like. That it's different when they know you for a while. And it was you speaking of that was such an antidote to alarmed aloneness. It just gave me a lot of warmth. So Jaden and whoever else asked the question earlier, you're welcome to let us know if that was helpful. And Jaden also writes, how can we help our clients with their resonance and accompaniment between sessions as well? Is it modeling for them or building the container over time? There's some very sweet research that shows that when clients record their sessions and listen to them again, then it supports their growth of their neural networks of self-warmth. And so that's one possibility. And a lot of clients that I have do take the recordings and then watch them again. I have one very sweet friend and client who worked with me for maybe 6 or 7 years and still has some recordings of our work together from those years, which was now maybe 8 or so years ago, and still listens sometimes. So there is something about the sweetness of the session work that can be a nourishment when we're not together. And then the guided meditations that allow people to have even just one breath of self-warmth can be really helpful too. And someone asks me privately, do you ever go back to a childhood memory or even a birth memory? For example, from a traumatic birth, and when it's reactivated, one feels fear and burning under the skin. Or from, let's say, a memory of needing to take care of your mother at 3 years old and having a fear that if you don't, she will not survive and you won't either. Absolutely, those kinds of memories are calling for us to time travel to them. Sometimes when they're very intense, we do need somebody with us. Yes. And Valerie says, perhaps I'm speaking more about abandonment, where a person tends to leave relationships before they might get left. Yes, the person is managing their pain by leaving. Yes. And then they don't feel it. They don't have to feel it because they've done what they needed to do to be able to be safe. Sometimes they feel it. And Barbara writes, Sarah, how do you feel after a session? How do you do self-care? I feel I've got an aura ring that tells me how I'm doing during the day. And what my aura ring tells me is that I am at my most relaxed during sessions. It's their session work is so sweet to me. And I love my clients so much. And yeah, it's just such a it's beautiful. But I do get very tired sometimes at the end of the day, and my brain doesn't work anymore. I just need to boo. I just need to, yeah, yeah. It's this work that we do here. This way of working is very nourishing. Yeah. Let me tell you a little bit more about resonance.
I received one private
Oh
message.
yes, of course we can do some private. Yeah.
Yeah, I just have, I think, one.
Okay.
Um, how does one be in warm resonance with a family member who speaks with consistent contempt?
Oh, this is very hard. Receiving contempt actually decreases our immune system response. So sometimes we're dependent on that family member, and then it's quite tricky. Like if they're the breadwinner and we've made an agreement with them that we're taking care of the household of the family and they're earning the money, we're so dependent when we don't have the choices that we would want to have. And sometimes it's like our integrity wants us to be kind even when somebody's not kind to us. Um, the very best thing is to begin to find our own contempt and begin to transform it so that we can feel the grief that lies beneath it. Often it's grief. Sometimes it's alarmed aloneness. And then we'll have more insight for others' contempt and patience with others' contempt. But I want to acknowledge the difficulty level. It's like asking yourself to do a triple backflip off the high dive. I mean, you splat into the water over and over again. It's just so painful to receive contempt. Were there more private messages?
There was at least one more I was tracking. How is it that traumatic memory can be life experience in some moments, and at other moments it remains a traumatic memory? What is that self-relation about? I think maybe it's self-reflection about when the same memory can be and feels like life experience, and in other moments it feels traumatic.
There's
Is that
something left. It means there's something left that the amygdala is holding that we haven't caught yet. That needs to be held with resonance so that it can emerge. Yeah. Yeah. I'll come back to the slides for a little bit now. And let's see, we're here. So one flotation device for learning to swim in emotions is resonant language. Resonant language is language that supports brains to have the sense of being known and to know themselves and find their own solid ground. Here are 9 forms of resonant language that research shows lights up the relational brain. So the relational brain is largely the right hemisphere, not completely, but very largely the right hemisphere. And these are the kinds of language that research has shown us light up the right hemisphere. Feelings and needs, if you're studying nonviolent communication, body sensations, fresh metaphor, impossible dream guesses, poetry and the poetic visual, acknowledging what is, some swearing, some humor, and IU relational language where we use I and you in every sentence and only say one sentence at a time for dialogues. So these are as we learn to kind of have a practice of confining ourselves as much as possible to this kind of language use, our session work becomes more and more powerful. Every time that we shift into instrumental language, we leave the client alone. Questions like, how do you feel? What do you need? Think of it like this. I think you should. If this were me, I would. Have you considered? What do you really want? What can you do to make this happen? Why is this important now? All of these questions are questions that are often seen in coaching and often seen in therapy, and none of them are resonant language. What if a practitioner's specialty is actually making the waters of emotion familiar, livable, and home? What if our natural birthright is the ocean of human emotions and experience? And what if clients actually need someone to come in and swim with them? We're going to do an 8-session class for those of you who might be interested in continuing to explore. It's called Being With, starts in February. And it'll cover the 8 circuits of emotion and motivation. It will cover learning about the window of welcome for emotions. It will cover time travel. And it's specifically geared towards space holders, which includes not just therapists, but anybody who's interested in therapeutic and emotional session work, or, as Marcia mentioned, holding space for a loved one, including being resonance partners, empathy buddies, therapists, social workers. It's open to anyone who would like to become a better listener, stay present in open and resonant attention when encountering the challenges and emotional depths of another human being. This could include relating to our loved ones, our partners and families and friends, as well as trauma that arises in activist movement spaces or any other place where trauma and distress arise. Total beginners and experienced resonance practitioners are welcome. This is for anyone interested in seeing how to expand your windows of welcome during dyadic session work, to practice and receive support as supportive practitioners, to have solid ground when trauma arises for those you are holding space for. And we'll learn unconscious contracts, we'll learn window of welcome, we'll learn how to identify the unconscious contracts that limit our windows of welcome, how to release them. We'll be able to work with our own alarmed aloneness to grow our windows for session work. We'll look at Jaak Panksepp's work on the circuits of emotion and motivation and how to use that knowledge in session work. Clues and strategies for identifying the edges of our windows and what to do about them. And the ways that we learn to limit our own life energy when we're young in ways that block us from fully inhabiting our full emotional range and our capacity to be with. And we'll also work with hopelessness and depression and the importance of resonating with joy in session work. And there's a special discount for those who learn about it on this webinar.
There may be. I was asking Rachel about that earlier, but there is an early bird 20% off through January 30th, and I'll put the link in the chat again. If there's a special, unfortunately, I wish she had responded to my text, but if there is an additional discount, we'll send it out via email. But there's 20% off right now through January 30th.
Yeah, and Magdalena asks a wonderful question. She said, I thought that you asked Mary, how do you feel? And I did. I said, how are you doing now? How's the baby doing now? How are you doing now? You know, what's happening with your body? And those things, those instrumental questions can be of immense support. But it's very important to know that they're not resonance. It's really important to know when we're asking an instrumental question that we're doing something for us. We're not doing something for the client. And then when I would hear myself do it, I would often add my own body sensations in order to bring a little more resonance to the experience. And Magdalena, thank you so much for that question.
And just to clarify, the discount is already on the website, so it's 20% off early bird through January 30th.
Oh, thank you so much, Jen. Thank you. If anybody, we also do partial scholarships for people who who have a sense that that would be important to them in any way, you can just write to the help desk to get support on that. And thank you, Patty. This is so sweet to hear. Patty writes, I had a one-on-one life-changing session with Sarah after many years of failed therapy, not resonant language. I'm wondering if you can direct me in what to do next. I've read your resonant self, your resonant self workbook, and took your recorded class. How can I practice this work? Buddy recommendations. Yes, in some of the longer classes, we support the formation of buddy connections between people so that they have somebody to practice with. And
we'll also have the annual Resonance Summit in April this year, April 5 through 9. And at the end of that, we invite people to sign up for Resonance.
Oh, that's right. That's so cool. Yeah. And there's a question to me, why don't you ask, what are you feeling? Well, we do ask, how are you doing? What's happening with your body sensations? Tend less to ask, what are you feeling? Just kind of try it out, see how it is. If somebody, for the person who asked this question and anybody who's interested, ask yourself, how am I doing? Ask yourself, what am I feeling? See which one you respond to more to, because that's a part of it as well. What does your body like? If you're asking questions that you feel really comfortable receiving as a practitioner, then there will be a comfort level with you no matter what words you're using. And Jaden says, what happens if a client requests or wants instrumental language? I ask as someone who wants instrumental language and sometimes feels unaccompanied that my therapist doesn't easily have that come to her. How interesting. I mean, being specific about what kind of instrumental language we want is helpful, like saying, I would like some advice now. I would like to hear strategy. Please do not resonate with me in this moment. Please do strategy. Or if we want our friend not to give us resonance, but to sympathize with us and be mean about somebody else, then we could be specific. No, don't be resonant with me. Tell me how bad the other person is. I want to hear that before I hear resonance at all. Sometimes when we really feel hurt, that's a question we can ask. Carla says, what's the difference between how do you feel and what you ask Mary? How are you doing? These questions are kind of, I wonder if they're starting to be answered, that we get to ask these questions. We just need to know they're not resonance. They're for us to gather information, which is not resonant. It's instrumental. So it might be really important. It is often really important. Tracy says, I have a standing meeting at the time of this course. Will I miss a lot of experiential practice during the recordings? I'm guessing yes. Tracy, you'd be very welcome to find a friend to join 2 for 1 if you would like to, since if you know you're missing the recordings. I mean, if you're just watching the recordings, then you would have a friend to practice with. And Garlic adds, the use of the word now can make it for the client. How do you feel now? And Kalita says, is this question also less relational? And Robin says, I'd like to hear about the question, what is important about that and why it wouldn't be helpful for the client? If you have a coaching client who really enjoys the cognitive experience of being accompanied and having these kind of compassionate inquiry questions asked, then you're doing fine if your client likes it and wants it. The way that what is important about that is not resonance. This is the point here. The question, what is important about that, is a question that's asking someone to think rather than letting somebody know that we're feeling with them. Robin, let me know if that makes any sense. There's nothing wrong with these questions. It depends on what modality you're working in. If you're working to support a brain's emergence, spontaneous emergence, you're looking for feelings and needs, impossible dreams, metaphor guesses. If you're old enough like me, I'm in my 60s, then you know the phrase priming the pump, where you would go to a hand pump and you would pour a little bit of water into it in order to be able to start the pump going with the capillary action. So I often think about resonant language as capillary, as creating capillary action for right hemispheres to begin to organize themselves. That was helpful either. Kalita says, what does it feel like to be you? Is that question relational or not relational? So, Kalita, this is one of those things where you are making all kinds of stuff relational. Like if you're really comfortable with a question and your body's really relaxed and it's part of the container that you've created with your client, then it's a sweet, sweet question. But the reason that it's not resonant language is because when you get the answer, it's for you rather than for the client. When you find out what it feels like to the client to be them, it's like if somebody used the word assessment, you're able to do a little bit of assessment. And if your client's a coaching client who's interested in that cognitive exploration or even coming closer to feelings exploration, it's going to work great. Okay. Oh, it's very sweet for people reaching out for buddies. Oh, so good. And I'm loving seeing the needs met and really sweet to be connected to old friends. And iPad 2 asks, what's the difference between agreeing with versus resonance feeling in within relationship? My spouse often gets upset if I don't go into venting. And I think I've been worrying that this is a form of abandoning her, even though it makes me uncomfortable. I wonder if your spouse, kind of like I was saying, like sometimes I want to say, tell me how bad the other person is. Don't be resonant with me. Tell me how bad the other person is. And that, is that what you mean by venting? If it is, then I think that it can feel really good to have somebody be mad at somebody with you. Sometimes that's what people want and need. But if it makes you really uncomfortable, that's important too. So, yeah. All right.
And they write yes.
Okay.
That was helpful.
Okay, good. All right. So lovely. Kalita says, even if we ask specifically about their body sensations and emotions, and specifically after they witnessed another body expressing, how does it feel to be you? We might ask. Yeah, you're eliciting the client's thought process and feeling process about themselves rather than resonance. But Kalita, you you are resonance personified. You could be totally instrumental for 24 hours and still be resonance personified. So there's something about the way we do everything that changes and overrides whatever any kind of technical definition of the way the language is. Galit, I hope that this is helpful. And Robin also experiences coaching clients getting emotional, even with some of these questions. But maybe I'm bringing a resonant language to them also. I imagine so.
Sarah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a private question that says, Sarah, you shared your crucible moment with Mary. Was that based on an edge that you felt within, or how did you know?
Yeah. Well, it was uh, it was a moment where I was trying to make something happen inside me. I was like, where do we find the inroad to the alarmed aloneness? I was thinking that I wasn't with Mary in that moment, but I managed to find my way back to her. And that finding our way back to our client is what tells us that something important has happened. Where we want to climb out of the river, but we don't. That's what a crucible moment is. And it's important because we're doing something different for the client than has happened before. We're making it through the temptation to give in to all those things that we listed, the trauma past, the desire to fix, and then sometimes we get all the way out of the river and then we go, oh, I got out of the river, and we jump back in, as you saw with the offering of hope of catching in the falling rather than falling with. Yeah, I think I'm answering that question. I'm starting to get tired, so I may not be able to answer more questions. Lovely to be with everyone. Oh, thank you so much. I'm just so grateful. Jai, can we let everybody come off mute and say goodbye if they would like to?